You know how people say life really begins at 40? Well, sometimes it actually begins at 64. My name is Cheryl. I'm 69 years old. And the story I'm about to tell you sounds like something out of a movie, the kind you watch and think, that could never happen in real life. But it did. Every tear, every word, every moment of courage you're about to read, all of it, is real. It happened 5 years ago, right here in the state of Oregon. People often say that time heals all wounds, that silence brings peace. But those people, honestly, have never been disrespected by their own child. They've never felt the sting of being pushed aside by their own family. I'm going to tell you something I've kept to myself for years, something that taught me that sometimes the most dangerous person in your life is the one who sits at your dinner table, smiles, and calls you Mom. For 45 years, I was simply Mrs. Cheryl Miller, the wife of Robert Miller, who ran a small auto repair shop on the outskirts of Portland. The mother of Sarah, our only daughter, whom we raised with every ounce of love and sacrifice we had. The sweet grandmother who always baked apple pies for the grandkids and kept an extra slice for anyone who dropped by. That's how people knew me when I was 64. A simple woman in flat shoes and a floral apron, sweeping the front porch every early morning. The neighbors all knew me. Linda from house number 47 often came by to borrow flour, and George, who lived on the corner, would stop in for a hot cup of coffee before heading home. My life revolved around small, comforting things. I brewed coffee with an old filter pot, the smell filling the kitchen by 5 a.m. That kitchen was the heart of my home. A pale blue Formica table, wooden chairs Robert had repaired himself, a gas stove that had lasted over 20 years, and a small fridge that was always full. On the Raman wall hung a pharmacy calendar and a few family photos. Sarah, as a little girl, sitting on her father's lap, our wedding picture, and snapshots of the grandkids when they were small. I loved weekends. Most Saturdays were for baking, and Sundays, after church, the whole family came over for lunch. Sarah arrived with her husband, Mark. I cooked my famous roast chicken with potatoes and honey glaze, served warm bread and salad, and the table overflowed with laughter. But everything changed when Robert passed away. Ah, Robert, a quiet man who showed love through actions. Every morning he woke at 5 a.m. He'd come home late, hands covered in grease, smelling of engines, but always smiling. "How was your day, old lady?" He'd tease, then kiss my forehead before heading to shower. He was old-fashioned, worked hard, paid every bill, never let me go without. I knew he kept some savings, just in case, but I never asked. I trusted him completely, and in 45 years of marriage, he never let me down. Then came the heart problems. I cared for him like a lioness guarding her cub, staying up all night, making sure he took his medicine, driving him to the hospital no matter the cost. We sold a few things around the house to cover the bills, or at least, that's what I thought. Robert passed away on a Tuesday morning. He fell asleep on my shoulder and never woke up. The doctor said his heart had stopped quietly, that he went peacefully. But my own heart shattered. The first few months were the hardest. The house felt too big, too silent. I talked to myself just to hear a voice. I'd turn on the radio in the kitchen, pretending someone was there having breakfast with me. The neighbors were kind, Linda brought food, and George still stopped by for coffee, even though it was just me now. And then, Sarah, my daughter, started visiting more often. At first, I thought it was out of love, out of concern. She came at least twice a week, always with Mark. They'd bring grocery bags, saying they'd just come from the store and decided to stop by. "Mom, how are you feeling?" Sarah would ask, hugging me tight. a hug I had missed so much. Are you eating well? Don't scrimp too much, okay? Mark would nod along. Ever so polite. He worked in finance, spoke gently, always well dressed, but there was something in his smile I never quite trusted. It was the kind of smile a salesman wears, the kind that tries too hard to convince you. Over time, their visits became more frequent. They came every Sunday for lunch. Like before, but now, the conversations shifted. They started talking about my health, my memory, and whether I should keep living alone. Mom, have you noticed you've been more forgetful lately? Sarah asked, her tone full of concern. Last week you forgot where you put your glasses, and the week before you left the stove on. I protested. Of course. Everyone forgets things sometimes, but they wouldn't let it go. Mark shook his head and said in that understanding tone, Mrs. Cheryl, we're really worried about you. This house is too big. There are stairs, there's a backyard. If something happened in the middle of the night, who would hear you call for help? Little by little, their story began to shift. Sarah said maybe her mom should live with people her own age so she wouldn't feel lonely. Mark added that it would be safer, that someone would be there to care for her 24 hours a day. You deserve to rest now, Mrs. Cheryl, he said, placing a hand on my shoulder. You've done so much for all of us raising Sarah, while Robert worked so hard, caring for the family your whole life. Now it's time for you to be cared for. I smiled, said nothing, but something inside me tightened a strange feeling that this concern wasn't as innocent as it sounded. Then he continued, It's time for you to take care of yourself. That's when they started bringing brochures. I still remember the first time a sunny Sunday afternoon after lunch. We were sitting in the living room drinking coffee when Sarah pulled a blue folder out of her bag. Mom, she said softly. Mark and I did some research and found a few places that would be perfect for you. She opened the folder and spread out colorful pamphlets. Look at this one, isn't it beautiful? They were nursing homes. But of course, they didn't call them that. They used gentler names. Luxury Senior Living Resort, Autumn Haven, Silver Pines Community Center. Names that sounded pleasant to hide the truth that those places were meant to leave old people behind. The brochures were full of pictures of smiling seniors, playing cards, doing yoga, eating lunch in spotless dining rooms. There were swimming pools, gardens, movie rooms, and medical offices. Everything looked tidy, clean, and completely fake. See, Mom? Sarah said, flipping through the pages. You'll have friends, daily activities. Nothing to worry about, Mark added. And this one's close to our house. We could visit you all the time. This is the best place in Portland, Mrs. Cheryl, he said. They have doctors on duty 24/7, private nurses, healthy meals. You'd live like a queen. Every time they said that, a chill ran down my spine. The people in those brochures looked more like actors from a butter commercial. I replied, keeping my voice calm. I don't want to be an actress in my own life. I'm fine here. I have my things, my routines, my neighbors. Mom, what if you fall? What if you get sick in the middle of the night? Sarah argued. You're alone here. No one would be able to help. I still have you, I said. Of course you do, Mom. She forced a smile. But we both have jobs, our own responsibilities. We can't be here 24 hours to watch over you. Week after week, the pressure grew. Each visit came with a new reason. I should leave my home sometimes for safety, sometimes because of maintenance costs, sometimes because the neighborhood isn't as nice as it used to be. Then came the light bulb incident. It was a Thursday afternoon. The living room bulb burned out, and I did what I'd done for decades, replaced it myself. I grabbed a kitchen stool, climbed up carefully, took out the old bulb, but as I stepped down, One leg of the stool slipped on the rug. I lost my balance and fell. Nothing serious, just a small bruise on my arm and a scare. I got up, put the stool away, and changed the bulb using a sturdier chair. The next day, when Sarah came over, I mentioned it. I thought it was a small thing, but she reacted as if I'd barely survived. "Mom, you could have broken your neck!" she cried, tears in her eyes. "What if you'd hit your head? What if no one found you?" "Sweetheart, it was just a slip." "A slip?" She shook her head. "That's a sign, Mom. It's God telling you it's no longer safe to live alone." Mark stepped in halfway through the conversation and shook his head after listening. "I told you, Sarah. I knew this would happen sooner or later." He turned to me, speaking in that same sympathetic tone. "Mrs. Sherrill, you were lucky this time, but what about next time?" That night, after they left, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the kitchen stool. Maybe they were right. Was I really still capable of taking care of myself? I began to notice things I had never paid attention to before. The stairs to the second floor seemed steeper, the rug a little more slippery, and the front door felt heavier to close. In the following weeks, the Sue pressure grew stronger. Sarah called every day to ask if I was eating properly, if I had fallen, if I was okay. Mark sometimes stopped by alone, saying it was on his way home from work. "Mrs. Sherrill," he said, sitting in the chair that used to belong to Robert, "you're a smart woman. You know we only want what's best for you." "I know, Mark." "Then you understand. This can't go on forever. We worry about you all the time. We can't work. We can't sleep. Just thinking about you alone in this big house." He spoke softly, almost like a father teaching a child. But behind his calm words, I sensed something unsettling, a quiet urgency, an agenda I couldn't quite name. Then, during one of those talks, he said something that froze my blood. "Have you thought about what's going to happen to this house well, if one day you're not here anymore? It would be better to take care of everything while you're still clear-minded." Clear-minded? I froze. Why would he say that? I was completely lucid, managing my own life, making every decision on my own. But after weeks of persuasion, I began to waver. Maybe they were right. Maybe I really was becoming a burden. Maybe I was being selfish for holding on to this house, these memories, and my independence, if it meant my daughter had to worry about me. That night, looking at the pictures of Robert all around the room, I whispered to myself, "Robert, if it were you, would you send me away?" By October of that year, I started seriously considering moving out. Sarah and Mark brought more paperwork this time, with price lists, conditions, and photos of the small room where I was going to live. "It's only temporary, Mom," Sarah said. "You'll like it. And if you don't, we'll talk about it again." But whoever really comes back from places like that? That October night, nearly 6 months after Robert's passing, I almost gave in. I almost believed that my independent life had ended. I almost believed that at 64, I wasn't really living anymore, just existing, under the care of strangers. I almost accepted that fate. But sometimes, destiny has other plans. Sometimes, just when you're about to give up on yourself, life sends you a sign, a discovery, a truth powerful enough to change everything. And that's exactly what happened to me. On a Saturday afternoon, when I decided to organize Robert's old room, the room that had been his, before I left, as Sarah and Mark wished. What I found that day didn't just reveal secrets my husband had hidden for decades. It also exposed the true intentions of the people I trusted most. You know those moments that split your life in two, before and after? That afternoon was exactly that line for me. If someone had told me that morning that before the sun set, I would uncover secrets Robert had kept for years. I would have laughed. Robert was always a straightforward man, or at least, that's what I had always believed. It was late October, one of those dry, golden fall days in Oregon. Sunlight streamed through the window of the room that was now mine alone. Shining on the oak dresser Robert had bought during our second year of marriage, a simple but sturdy piece with 3 large drawers and a mirror dulled by time. I was planning to tidy up his clothes. I couldn't bear how every time I opened the closet, his scent still lingered in the fabric. The smell of Tide detergent, Old Spice cologne, and that distinct scent that was uniquely Robert's. Do you know that feeling when you hug someone and can recognize them just by their scent, even with your eyes closed? That was my Robert. I began folding each shirt, remembering every occasion he wore them. The light blue one for Sunday church, the red plaid one he loved for gardening, and the white dress shirt he, too, wore on special days now yellowed with time. I set aside a few to give away, but the ones that meant the most, I placed in a box and put on the top shelf. I wasn't ready to let him go completely. Then I opened the last drawer, and that afternoon took a completely different turn. The first drawer was normal. Underwear, socks, t-shirts, the usual things after 45 years of marriage. The second held personal papers, his driver's license, old prescriptions, a few utility bills. Nothing unusual. But the third drawer was stuck. I pulled once, twice, 3 times. It wouldn't budge. I figured it was just the humidity, since that drawer often jammed on hot, dry days. Finally, it came loose, and I heard a faint sound, something shifting inside. The drawer was nearly empty, with only a few of Robert's small belongings I hadn't moved yet. As I took them out, I noticed the bottom panel was loose. Curious, I carefully lifted the wooden board, and there it was. A brown envelope, sealed tightly with tape, hidden in a secret compartment I never knew existed. On the envelope, in his familiar handwriting, were the words, "For my Cheryl, only open if something happens to me." My hands trembled as I held it. It was heavy, filled with papers. I sat down on the bed we had shared for so many years, where he had kissed me for the last time, where I had woken up alone so many mornings since he passed. I opened the envelope slowly, almost afraid of what I might find. Inside was a 3-page handwritten letter in Robert's neat script, and a stack of carefully folded documents. I began to read. To my dearest Cheryl, if you're reading this, it means I've gone before I could tell you everything I've done for us over the years. Forgive me for keeping this from you, but I only wanted to protect you and protect what's ours. Protect me from what? I wondered. I know you've always believed we were just an ordinary family, living modestly, and for a long time, that was true. But about 20 years ago, when business at the shop got better, I started saving every extra dollar. I didn't put it in a bank. Cheryl, you know I never trusted them much. I invested in things that were real, things that had lasting value. 20 years. He'd been planning for our future for 2 whole decades, and I hadn't known a thing. Do you remember those Saturday mornings when I said I was going to look at some land down south of Portland? It wasn't just curiosity, Cheryl. Those were the properties I bought, one by one, paying cash to avoid trouble. Right now, we own 5 lots in the suburbs, all of which are increasing in value. I was stunned. 5 pieces of land. Robert had bought property and never told me. And do you remember those times you thought I was lending money to friends? It wasn't that, Cheryl. That money was invested in small, local businesses. When George expanded his bakery, I was one of the first investors. Linda, the one who had grown her little hair salon on the corner, had also been helped by Robert. They paid him a share of their profits every month. It wasn't a huge amount, but together it created a steady income. So my husband had been investing in businesses. Robert, the man I'd always thought was just a kind mechanic who helped his friends out of goodwill, had secretly been an investor all along. But what shocked me the most, Cheryl, was in the folder he left with the letter. The apartment building on Hawthorne Street, right in downtown Portland. That one. Cheryl, the building you always said was beautiful whenever we passed it on the bus? It's ours. I froze. That building was ours. 6 apartments, all currently rented out, including the one where Sarah and Mark were living. My heart stopped. My daughter, Sarah, had been paying rent to me without even knowing it. I know you're wondering why I never told you. The truth is, I just wanted to make sure everything was stable before I revealed it. And when I got sick, I didn't want to worry you more. Tears filled my eyes. I didn't know if I was crying out of sadness because he was gone before he could tell me, or joy, realizing I wasn't the poor widow I thought I was. There's one more thing, Cheryl, and this is the most important part. I don't trust Mark, Sarah's husband. I know you see him as polite and attentive, but I've noticed things. He asks too many questions about money, about the house, about what we own, questions no son-in-law should be asking. A chill ran down my spine. Mark, the man Robert had once doubted, and now it was all coming true. Our daughters blinded by love. But you're smarter than that, Cheryl. If one day someone tries to convince you that you can't take care of yourself, if they try to move you out of your home, or make you believe you're a burden, remember what's written in this letter. Use what you know to protect yourself. You're stronger than you think, and wealthier than they could ever imagine. Never let anyone make you feel small or powerless. You raised a wonderful daughter, kept a home for decades, and loved me with your whole heart for a lifetime. If that's not proof that you can do anything, then nothing ever will be. The letter ended with, all documents have been legally registered and notarized. Attorney Edward Collins on Madison Street knows every detail. He's the one who helped me arrange everything. If anything happens, go to him. I'll always love you, Robert. When I finished reading, my hands were trembling so much I could barely hold the papers. I opened the folder that came with the letter and nearly fainted. Inside were property deeds for 5 lots in the Portland suburbs, all in my name. Partnership contracts with small local businesses. A savings account I never knew existed with nearly $200,000 in it. And finally, the deed for the 6-unit apartment building on Hawthorne Street. 6 apartments. 6 families paying rent to me each month, including my own daughter. I sank to the bedroom floor, surrounded by papers and tears. I was no longer the poor widow I thought I was. I was a landlady, an investor, a woman with property and savings. I was a wealthy woman, at least in the practical sense. But what stunned me even more than the money itself was what it meant. Sarah and Mark had never really been worried about me. They cared only about the assets. They wanted to send me to a nursing home to take this house because they thought it was the only thing of value I owned. They had no idea about the entire fortune Robert had quietly built over the years. I replayed every recent conversation, the sweet persuasion, the talk about safety, and especially that question Mark asked, "Are you still clear-minded, Mom?" Now everything was clear. They wanted to get rid of me, to gain full access to what they believed was the only asset. This house. They had no idea I was sitting on a fortune beyond their wildest imagination. That Saturday afternoon, while cleaning my husband's room, I didn't just uncover the financial secrets he had hidden for years. I discovered the true nature of the people I loved most. And more than anything, I realized that at 64, I wasn't weak or dependent the way they thought I was. Robert was right. I was stronger than I'd ever believed. And now that I held the truth in my hands, it was time to prove it. I gathered all the papers into a folder and hid it carefully behind my winter sweaters. Then I went down to the kitchen and brewed a strong cup of coffee. I needed to think. I needed to plan. Because one thing was certain. This discovery had changed everything, and Sarah and Mark had no idea what storm was coming their way. 2 days later, on Monday morning, they showed up again, this time with more papers from the nursing home, complete with a move-in date. But this time, I was ready. This time, I knew exactly who was sitting across from me. What I had discovered about myself that afternoon had changed not only my life, but the fate of all of us. Because sometimes, the most dangerous person in a negotiation is the one everyone underestimates. And sometimes, realizing who you truly are becomes the most powerful weapon you can ever have. Have you ever had to pretend you didn't know a truth, one that, if spoken aloud, could change everything? Have you ever had to smile at people who thought they were deceiving you while you saw through every one of their moves? That was exactly what I did for the next 2 days after discovering Robert's secret. 2 days of pretending to be the same, weak, confused Mrs. Sherrill. 2 days preparing for the most important confrontation of my life. On Monday morning, when the doorbell rang, I already knew who was outside. Sarah and Mark had called the night before, saying they wanted to come over to discuss something important. I knew exactly what that meant. I opened the door. Sarah stood there holding a folder, her face determined, like someone ready to solve a big problem. Mark, as always, wore that polished businessman's smile dress pants, a crisp shirt, shiny shoes. "Hi, Mom," Sarah said, kissing my cheek. "Did you sleep well?" "Very well, dear. Would you like some coffee?" I just made a fresh pot. "Of course, Mrs. Sherrill," Mark said, stepping inside as if he owned the place. "Your coffee's the best." I went to the kitchen to pour the coffee while they whispered to each other in the living room. I brought out a tray, hot coffee, cornbread I'd baked the day before, sugar, cream just like always. Only this time, I knew exactly what I was doing. I was serving coffee to two people plotting to push me out of my own home. "Mom," Sarah began after pouring herself a cup, "we came today because it's time to make a decision." "What decision would that be?" I asked. Mark leaned forward, his voice full of concern. "Mrs. Sherrill, do you remember the nursing home we told you about? We found the perfect place for you." Sarah opened the folder and pulled out colorful brochures, floor plans, room photos, pricing sheets. "Look, Mom, isn't this beautiful?" It was a nursing home, but of course, that's not what they called it. They used softer names: Luxury Senior Living Community, Autumn Haven Residence, Silver Pines Lifestyle Center. Names that sounded comforting, hiding the truth that it was a place where people were left behind. The brochures were filled with photos of smiling seniors playing cards, doing yoga, eating lunch in bright dining halls. There were gardens, pools, movie rooms, and on-site medical care. Everything looked clean, organized, and painfully fake. "See, Mom," Sarah said, flipping through the pages. "You'd have friends there. Activities every day. No worries at all," Mark added. "And it's close to our house, so we could visit you often." "This is the best place in Portland, Mrs. Sherrill," he continued. "They have doctors available 24/7, private nurses, healthy meals, you'd live like a queen." Every time he said that, a chill ran down my spine. The people in those brochures looked like butter commercial actors. I replied calmly, "I don't want to be an actress in my own life. I'm fine right here with my things, my routine, and my neighbors." "Mom," What if you fall? What if you get sick at night? Sarah protested. You're all alone here, no one to help you. I still have you. Don't. I said. Of course, Mom. She smiled awkwardly. But we both work. We have our own responsibilities. We can't be here 24 hours a day. Week after week, the pressure grew. Each visit came with a new reason why I should leave, for safety, for maintenance costs, or because the neighborhood isn't as nice as it used to be. And then came the light bulb incident. That Thursday afternoon, the living room light burned out. Out of habit, I decided to replace it myself, like I'd done for decades. I grabbed the kitchen stool, climbed carefully, removed the old bulb, but as I stepped down, one leg of the stool slipped on the rug. I lost my balance and fell. It wasn't serious, just a small bruise on my arm and a fright. I stood up, put the stool away, and replaced the bulb using a sturdier chair. The next day, when Sarah came over, I told her about it. I thought it was nothing, but she reacted as if I'd narrowly escaped. Mom, you could have broken your neck, she cried, tears in her eyes. What if you'd hit your head? What if no one found you? Sweetheart, it was just a slip. A slip, she shook her head. That was a sign, Mom. God's way of telling you it's no longer safe to live alone. He pulled a gold-plated fountain pen from his shirt pocket, the kind executives use to sign big contracts. All you have to do is sign here, Mrs. Sherrill. We'll take care of everything else. Moving your things, canceling the bills, all of it. Canceling the bills? I asked, pretending to be naive. Yes, Mom, Sarah replied. Once you move out, you won't need to keep this house anymore. We'll sell it, use the money to pay the nursing home fees, and whatever's left will be yours. Ah, I see. They wanted me to sign away the house so they could sell it. How much do you two think this house is worth? I asked. Sarah and Mark exchanged glances. That kind of look people share right before they lie about money. The market's slow right now, but some agents said maybe 150, 200,000 at most. 200 tops. I almost laughed. This house, in a quiet Portland neighborhood with a big yard and well-kept maintenance, was worth at least twice that amount. Robert's savings account alone was nearly worth that much. So where would you two live? I asked. At the apartment on Hawthorne Street, Mom. It's small but cozy, Sarah replied. I raised an eyebrow. The apartment they didn't know belonged to me, the one where my daughter had been paying rent to her own mother. All right, I said, setting my coffee cup down. Let me think about it first. Sarah grabbed my hand. No need to think too much, Mom. You almost fell last week. What if it's worse next time? She's right, Mrs. Sherrill, Mark added. We only want what's best for you. I listened as they talked for another half hour about safety, comfort, and how you'll be happier with people your age. It was all part of a carefully rehearsed performance, until they asked, So, Mom, can we take you to see the nursing home tomorrow? That was the moment I decided to end this charade. No, I said firmly. I'm not visiting any nursing home, and I'm not leaving this house. The air in the room froze. Sarah frowned. Mark straightened up, trying to stay calm. Mom, are you being stubborn? No, Sarah, I answered. I'm being very clear-minded. I stood up, went into my room, and came back holding the folder I had prepared every document Robert had left, neatly organized. I set it down in the middle of the table, right between their glossy nursing home brochures. Before we go any further, I said, there are a few things you should know. I opened the folder and pulled out the deed to the very house we were sitting in. This house isn't worth $200,000, Mark. According to last week's appraisal, it's worth $450,000. His eyes widened. But that's not even the most interesting part. I took out the property deeds for 5 lots in the southern suburbs of Portland. These lots also belong to me, each one now worth between 80 and 100,000. Sarah's face went pale. And there's more, I said, pulling out the investment contracts. I'm a shareholder in 6 small businesses around here. They're not huge, but they're all profitable. I receive dividends every month. Sums of money you couldn't even imagine. Mark opened his mouth to speak, but I didn't give him the chance. But the best part, I continued, pulling out the ownership certificate for the building, is this. I placed the document right in front of Sarah. Sweetheart, the apartment you and your husband are living in on Hawthorne Street, it belongs to me. The entire building belongs to me. You've been paying rent to your own mother for the past 4 years without even knowing it. The room fell into absolute silence. Sarah stared at the paper as if she'd seen a ghost. Mark's face turned pale. That can't be real, he stammered. Oh, but it is, I said, turning to the last page of the file. Here's the signature and the official notary seal. Everything's clear, legal, and all of it belongs to me. Finally, Sarah found her voice. Mom, why didn't you ever tell me? Because I didn't know, sweetheart. I only found out 2 days ago while cleaning your father's things. I took out Robert's letter and laid it on the table. Your father left this, explaining everything he quietly built over the years, all to protect this family. Mark picked up the letter and began reading, his face growing tenser with every line. And you know what? I said, looking straight into his eyes. He wrote that he suspected you, Mark. He found it odd that a son-in-law was so interested in his in-laws' finances. Mrs. Sherrill, you'll let me finish. I cut him off, my voice calm but firm. For weeks, you two have been pressuring me to leave my home, trying to convince me that I'm weak, useless, losing my mind. Mom, we just wanted what you wanted, I interrupted, was to get rid of me so you could take what you thought was my only asset, this house. I gathered all the documents together and closed the folder. Neither of you had any idea you were talking to a woman who could buy 10 of those nursing homes you wanted to lock me in. Mark tried to recover his smooth tone. Mrs. Sherrill, there must be some misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, Mark, I said, looking him straight in the eye. There's manipulation, greed disguised as concern, and a plan to make me believe I'm no longer capable of living my own life. I stood up and walked to the living room door. Mark, from this moment on, you are not allowed in my house ever again. But Mrs. Sherrill, no buts. Get out of my house. And if you ever come back or try to threaten me, I'll call the police. Sarah stood up, trembling, caught between her husband and the truth that had just shattered. Mom, please, you don't have to do this. Yes, I do, I said, my heart aching as I looked at her. You have to choose: either stay with this greedy man and lose your mother forever, or wake up and see who truly loves you. Mark grabbed the nursing home brochures, his face flushed red. Sarah, let's go. Your mother's not in her right mind. I'm perfectly clear-minded, Mark, more than ever. I opened the door. Get out of my house and don't ever come back. He froze, ready to say something. But when he saw my eyes, he stayed silent and walked out. Sarah, let's go. My daughter turned to me, tears streaming down her face. Mom, this door will always be open for you, Sarah, but it will be closed to him forever. They left in silence, Mark breathing heavily in anger, Sarah sobbing quietly. When the door shut behind them, I sat down and took a deep breath. My hands no longer trembled. My heart was racing, but from relief, not fear. For the first time in months, I felt truly free. But I knew this wasn't over. I knew Mark, he wasn't the kind of man to give up easily. and I was right. 3 weeks later, I received a court summons. Mark was suing me, claiming that I suffered from dementia and needed a legal guardian. He alleged that I was being manipulated and was no longer capable of making my own decisions. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday in mid-December at the Family Court of Multnomah County, Portland. That morning, I put on my best black dress and the pearl necklace Robert had given me for our 25th wedding anniversary. I walked through the busy streets toward the courthouse, anxious but determined. What Mark didn't know, what no one knew, was that among the documents Robert had left behind, there was one detail that would change everything. A secret powerful enough to turn that courtroom into the stage for the biggest shock of my life. And with just 3 simple words that I was about to say before the judge, everyone would finally know who Mrs. Cheryl Miller truly was. There are moments in life you never forget. Every detail, every sound, every scent stays carved in your memory. The day I walked into the courthouse in Multnomah County was one of those moments. It was a bright Thursday morning in December, right before Christmas. The sun was shining, but my stomach felt cold not from the weather, but from emotion. I was nervous, but not afraid. After weeks of preparation, I knew exactly what I had to do. I woke up early, brewed a strong cup of coffee, and ate a slice of cornbread left over from the day before. I tried to stick to my usual morning routine to stay calm, but I took longer than usual choosing my outfit because I knew this day would change everything. I wanted to look composed and dignified so that when people saw me, they would see a woman who was serious, confident, and fully in control of her own life. I chose an elegant black dress that I only wore on special occasions. The fabric was still in good condition, no stains, no signs of age. I put on my low black heels, comfortable yet graceful. And finally, I clasped around my neck the pearl necklace Robert had given me on our 25th anniversary. It wasn't expensive, nor were the pearls real, but its sentimental value was priceless. Every time I wore it, I felt as if he was still beside me. I carried the brown leather purse Sarah had given me for Mother's Day a few years ago, back when she still saw me as a mother, not an obstacle. Inside, I neatly organized every document into a folder, double-checking that nothing was missing. I left the house at 8 a.m. The hearing was scheduled for 10 a.m., but I wanted to arrive early to get used to the atmosphere, to steady myself. The courthouse stood in the heart of Multnomah County, a pale stone building with large columns at the entrance, wide stairs, and a solemn presence that made someone like me feel small. On the bus, I gazed out the window. The county was waking up. People heading to work, cars lined up at traffic lights. Life went on, as usual. And there I was, a 64-year-old woman, on my way to the most important confrontation of my life. When I arrived, the courthouse was already bustling. Lawyers in suits walked briskly back and forth. People waited in benches. The sound of heels echoed against the marble floors. I felt small in that serious place, but I took a deep breath and remembered Robert's words from his letter. "You are stronger than you think." I found the courtroom, hallway 3B, family court, and sat on the bench outside to wait. It was only 8:40, so I still had time. At 9:15, Sarah arrived. She was 5 months pregnant, her belly showing beneath a dark blue dress. When she saw me, she hesitated, unsure whether to greet me or not. Finally, she approached. "Hi, Mom." "Hello, sweetheart," I replied. She sat next to me, leaving a small space between us. The silence was heavy. "Mom, how have you been?" she asked softly. "I'm fine. And you? How's the baby?" "Good, Mom," she said, resting her hand on her belly. "Sarah, we don't need to talk right now. Let's just let the court handle this first." 5 minutes later, Mark showed up accompanied by a lawyer in a gray suit carrying a briefcase. When he saw me, he didn't bother to greet me, only gave a cold nod before turning to whisper with his attorney. I overheard bits and pieces. Clear signs of dementia, unable to manage her estate, under external influence. At 9:50, the court clerk opened the door to the courtroom and called the case. Plaintiff. Mark Robinson, defendant. Cheryl Miller. We walked in. The room was smaller than I expected, but solemn. The judge's bench stood higher than the rest, with chairs for each party and the American flag hanging on the wall. I sat in the seat assigned to me. Sarah sat beside me. Mark and his lawyer were across the room. A representative from the district attorney's office and a court clerk were present. All that was left was to wait for the judge. At exactly 10 a.m., the door in the back opened. The clerk spoke loudly. All rise for the honorable judge. Everyone stood, and that moment changed my life forever. A man in a black robe entered, holding a folder in his hand. When his eyes met mine, he froze halfway down the aisle. His face went pale, as if he had seen a ghost, and he whispered almost inaudibly, "It's her." The entire courtroom fell into absolute silence. Everyone stared at me in confusion. Mark frowned. His lawyer leaned in and whispered something to him. Sarah looked around, bewildered, but I knew exactly who that man was. Among the documents Robert had left behind, there was a donation certificate, a large contribution he had made years earlier to a social project run by a judge. The project was called Street Mary's Child Center, a free daycare for underprivileged children in East Portland. And the person in charge of that project was Judge Henry Moore, the very man now standing before me, clearly shaken. I stood up, looked straight at him, and spoke 3 simple words that froze the entire courtroom. Street Mary's Child Center. The effect was immediate. Judge Henry Moore gripped the edge of his bench, his legs trembling slightly. Everyone stared at me, confused, as he softly repeated, "Good Lord, you're Robert Miller's wife?" "Yes, Your Honor," I replied. He stepped closer to the bench, removed his glasses, wiped them, then put them back on, and took a deep breath. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice solemn yet full of emotion. "Before we proceed with this hearing, I need to clarify something." Mark's lawyer shifted uneasily and asked, "Your Honor, is there an issue?" "No legal conflict," the judge replied, "but I have a personal connection that must be disclosed for transparency." He turned to look at me, his eyes filled with respect and emotion. "The woman before you today, Mrs. Cheryl Miller, is the wife of one of the greatest benefactors I've ever known." The room fell silent again. He continued, 10 years ago, when I was still running community programs, I started a project building a free daycare for underprivileged children in East Portland. "We needed funding," Judge Henry Moore said, his voice thick with emotion. "And at that time, it was nearly impossible to find anyone willing to support such a cause." He paused briefly before continuing. "Her husband, Mr. Robert Miller, walked into my office one Tuesday afternoon. A humble man in a mechanic's uniform, his hands still stained with grease, told me he had heard about my project and wanted to help." Mark turned pale, and Sarah's eyes widened in disbelief. "I thought he might donate a small amount like many others, maybe 50 or $100. But Mr. Robert placed an envelope on my desk containing $60,000 in cash." The whole courtroom stirred. The prosecutor leaned forward, listening intently. I asked him why he was doing it, whether he represented a company or wanted public recognition. He simply replied, "This is for the kids, sir. My wife, Cheryl, and I don't have many children of our own, so we want to help others. But please, don't mention our names." Tears streamed down my face. I couldn't hold them back. I had never known about that conversation. Never known my husband had spoken those words about me. The street, Mary's Child Center, was built thanks to the Miller family's donation. Over the years, it has cared for more than 500 underprivileged children, providing them with education, food, and free medical care. The judge stepped down from the bench and approached me. "Mrs. Cheryl," he said, his voice trembling, "I have a photo of you and Mr. Robert in my office, along with pictures of the first children ever admitted to the center. For years, every time I looked at that photo, I thought to myself, someday, I want to meet this woman and thank her in person." He returned to his seat, turned toward Mark, and said, "And today, I find that the very woman in that photo is sitting before me, accused of being mentally unfit and incapable of managing her own affairs." Mark's lawyer quickly interjected, "Your Honor, with all due respect, that has no bearing on the defendant's current mental capacity." "It most certainly does, Counselor," Judge Henry said, his tone sharpening. "It has everything to do with it. Because if there's one person in this courtroom whose mental competence I would never question, it's the wife of the man who changed the lives of hundreds of poor children." He opened the case file and began to read aloud. "The plaintiff claims that the defendant is under undue influence, no longer capable of managing her own estate, has refused appropriate care, and poses a risk to her own safety." Then he looked up over his glasses. "Mr. Mark, please tell the court what is your true intention in this case. Are you the biological son of the defendant?" "No, Your Honor," Mark replied, his voice shrinking. "I'm her son-in-law." "Son-in-law, I see," the judge said, raising an eyebrow. "And is the defendant's daughter present?" Sarah shifted nervously in her seat, stammering, "Yes, sir. But I don't completely agree with the lawsuit." "Understood." The judge nodded. "So the son-in-law is requesting guardianship over his mother-in-law against the wishes of her own daughter." Mark's lawyer tried to recover. "Your Honor, the situation is more complex than that." The judge turned to me, his voice calm but firm. "Mrs. Cheryl, please tell the court about your current condition. How is your health? How is your life?" I rose slowly, glancing around the room. "Your Honor, Henry, my health is excellent. I'm 64 years old and have taken care of myself in my home for nearly a year since my husband passed away. I wake up early, make coffee, talk with my neighbors, go to the market, to the bank. I handle all my own affairs. And as for managing my finances, I have some documents I'd like to present." I opened the folder from my bag and placed it on the table. Property deeds, investment contracts, ownership certificates. I own 5 parcels of land in the southern suburbs of Portland. I'm a shareholder in 6 small local businesses, and I'm the owner of an apartment building downtown, which provides me with steady monthly income. The judge examined each document carefully, then asked, "Mr. Mark, were you aware of this financial situation?" "No, Your Honor," I replied. "He thought all I had was the house I live in. That's why he tried to push me into a nursing home and sell it." The prosecutor spoke up. "Your Honor, based on what has been presented, there is no indication whatsoever that the defendant lacks capacity. On the contrary, she demonstrates a clear and thorough understanding of her assets and her life." Judge Henry Moore nodded in agreement. "Mr. Mark," he said sternly, "do you have any medical evidence or psychiatric report to support your claim?" "No, Your Honor." "Do you have any witnesses who can confirm that she suffers from memory loss or dementia?" She once fell at home." "Fell, you say?" The judge turned to me. "Can you explain that incident?" "Mrs. Cheryl, I slipped while changing a light bulb. Your Honor, something I've done for decades. I only bruised my arm slightly." The judge closed the file. Ladies and gentlemen, after hearing both parties and reviewing the evidence, it's clear there is no legal basis for this guardianship request. The defendant is fully competent and entirely capable of managing her own assets and life. Mark fidgeted, his face turning red. Furthermore, the judge continued, I have serious concerns about the true motivation behind this case. I recommend that the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office open an NPALAT investigation into potential elder financial exploitation. The prosecutor quickly took notes. The petition for guardianship is hereby denied. Mrs. Cheryl Miller retains full legal capacity in all civil matters. The plaintiff, Mr. Mark Robinson, will bear all court costs. As the sound of the gavel echoed, a wave of relief swept through me. But the hearing wasn't over yet. Mrs. Cheryl, the judge said, after this session, could you stay for a few minutes? I'd like to speak privately with you about your husband and the street, Mary Center. Of course, Your Honor, Henry. The hearing adjourned. Mark stormed out, furious, followed by his lawyer. Sarah came toward me, her eyes filled with tears. Mom, please forgive me. I was so blind. I let that man deceive me and made me forget who my mother really is. I pulled my daughter into my arms, right there in the courtroom. It's all right, sweetheart. I forgive you. But from now on, you must learn how to choose to understand what truly matters in your life. I left the courthouse victorious, not out of hatred, but with my dignity restored. The real victory wasn't about winning the case. It was about reclaiming ownership of my own life. I realized I had never been weak or dependent, no matter what they made me believe. And more than that, I understood that respect, gratitude, and admiration can come from the most unexpected places at the moments we least expect them. That day, at the family court of Multnomah County in Portland, 3 simple words had changed everything, not only the outcome of the trial, but the way I saw myself. At 64, I realized my life was just beginning. And sometimes, the most powerful person in the room is the one everyone underestimates. There's a unique feeling that comes when you win a battle you never wanted to fight, but had to protect your own dignity. It's like an invisible weight you've carried for so long is suddenly lifted. And you can finally take a deep breath for the first time in months. That was exactly how I felt as I stepped out of the courthouse that morning. The sun stood high in the sky, shining brightly. Yet, I felt no fear. I walked through downtown Portland, my head held high, shoulders straight, holding my brown leather purse as if it contained the most precious treasures in the world, and in truth, it did. Inside that bag were all the documents proving that I was capable, lucid, and independent. But more than anything, it was proof that it's never too late to find yourself again. My private conversation with Judge Henry Moore lasted nearly an hour. He showed me photos of the street, Mary's Center, and told me about the children whose lives had been changed thanks to the project Robert had quietly supported. In his eyes, I saw genuine gratitude, a kind of respect that moved me deeply. Mrs. Cheryl, he said before I left, I hope you understand that your family has done something remarkable for this community. Your husband wasn't just a benefactor, he was a visionary. And through your composure today, I can see that the two of you were truly made for each other. On my way home, I stopped by a small cafe downtown, ordered a cup of coffee with milk and a slice of warm cheese pastry. Simple things. Yet that day, they tasted like freedom. Sitting at an old wooden table, watching people pass by, I had time to reflect on everything that had happened. Mark had left the courthouse defeated and humiliated. His plan to force me into a nursing home and take the house had completely collapsed. Now, he was under investigation by the district attorney's office for attempting to exploit an elderly person's assets. The legal consequences for him could be severe, but what worried me most was Sarah. My daughter left the courtroom in tears, torn between the husband she had chosen and the mother she had just rediscovered as her anchor. 5 months pregnant, she would now have to face some very big decisions for herself and the baby she was carrying. I got home at 3 p.m. The house was still quiet, but it was no longer the heavy, lonely silence. From before, it was the peace of someone who had found her rightful place in life again. I made myself an afternoon coffee, cut a small piece of leftover cornbread, and went out to sit on the back porch. The little garden needed tending. The grass had grown tall, and the flowers had wilted under the December sun, but I could see potential there. New buds ready to grow, life ready to bloom again. The next 2 days passed in a serenity I had never known. I returned to my usual routine, but with an entirely new spirit. I woke up early, out of joy, not habit. I made coffee because I loved its aroma, not just because mornings needed caffeine. I talked to my neighbors not to pass the time, but because I truly valued the simple connections between people. Mrs. Linda, my neighbor from number 47, noticed the change right away. "Mrs. Cheryl, you look like someone who just won the lottery," she said when she saw me that Saturday morning. "You might be right, Linda," I smiled. "I just found something priceless that I thought I'd lost." "And what about Sarah? Haven't seen her around lately." That casual question hit the tender spot, still healing inside me. Sarah hadn't called, hadn't texted, hadn't come by. I knew she was struggling, caught between marriage and family, but I still missed her, especially now, knowing what she was about to face as a soon-to-be single mother. "She's having a tough time, but she'll be fine, Linda. And if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask. Good neighbors are meant to help each other." On Sunday morning, when the clock struck 8, the doorbell rang. It was an odd hour for visitors. I opened the door, and there stood Sarah, alone, holding a small suitcase, her eyes red from crying. "Mom," her voice trembled. "Can I come in?" "Of course, sweetheart. This will always be your home." She stepped inside slowly, as if afraid to disturb the peace, set the suitcase down, and looked at me, her eyes full of shame, regret, and hope. "Mom, please let me apologize for what I did, for what I allowed to happen, and for ever doubting you." I pulled my daughter into my arms before she could finish the sentence. I felt her trembling, the gentle weight of her pregnant belly pressed between us, and the familiar scent of her shampoo, the same one she'd used since she was a teenager. "You're already forgiven, Sarah. Don't punish yourself anymore." "No, Mom. I need to say it. I know you raised me to be better than this, to never let anyone manipulate me, to think for myself." We walked into the kitchen together. I boiled water and made coffee. Sarah sat down in the same chair she used to sit in for breakfast before school. For a moment, it felt as if time had turned back, as if my little girl had come home again, needing comfort and guidance. "Tell me what happened," I said, placing a cup of coffee with milk in front of her. "I left the house Thursday night, right after the hearing. I couldn't even look at Mark anymore, couldn't stand knowing he used me to hurt you. Now I'm staying at Amanda's place, an old classmate of mine. She's letting me sleep in her guest room." She took a deep breath. "But Mom, I'm scared. I'm 5 months pregnant. I haven't had a stable job for over a year. I don't have any savings. What about Mark? Didn't he try to stop you?" "He did. He said I was being emotional, that I'd regret it, that I wasn't capable of raising a child on my own." She paused, then added softly, "But then I thought of you, Mom, how you raised me, mostly, on your own because Dad was always working. And look at me now. You grew up strong and smart, Sarah. You just lost your way for a little while. It happens to everyone." "Mom, can I ask you for something?" "Of course, sweetheart. What is it? Can I come back here? Just for a while until I have the baby and get back on my feet. I promise I won't be a burden. I'll help around the house. I'll. Sarah, I interrupted, taking her hand. You don't have to ask permission to come home. This will always be your home. She broke down in tears, not the restrained, guilty kind from before, but the kind that comes when someone finally finds safety in the middle of a storm. I helped Sarah carry her suitcase into her old room. Everything was just as she'd left it. The single bed, the wooden dresser, the bookshelf with a few keepsakes from her teenage years. It was the perfect place for her to start over, to think about the future and prepare to become a mother. Mom, she said as she unpacked, there's something I need to tell you. What is it, honey? I've actually had doubts about Mark for a while. He always avoided questions about the future, about what life would be like once the baby was born. He talked a lot about money and security, but never gave any real answers. When he started pushing you to move into a nursing home, I realized he cared more about that than about me. He was the one who brought it up, who researched it, who urged me to talk to you. And you didn't get suspicious? I did, Sarah whispered. But he always said it was because I worried too much about you, that he only wanted what was best for the family. I was too naive, Mom. Or maybe I just didn't want to see the truth. What matters is that you see it now before it's too late. Sarah rested her hand gently on her belly. Pure instinct, the reflex of a mother. Mom, I'm scared. I'm afraid I can't take care of my baby. I'm afraid I'm not strong enough. You have more than you think, Sarah. You have education, intelligence, integrity, and most importantly, you're not alone. You have me. And I have the means and experience to make sure you and my grandchild have a good life. It was the first time I had spoken openly about my finances since discovering everything. I saw in Sarah's eyes both relief and disbelief. Mom, all of that Dad really left it all to you? Yes, sweetheart. Your father was more farsighted than we ever realized. He quietly prepared everything to protect this family. I told her about Robert's letter, about the land, the apartment building she once lived in, without knowing it was mine, the small investments, and the savings accounts I hadn't even known existed. So, does that mean you're rich now, Mom? No, sweetheart. It means I don't have to depend on anyone anymore, and that I can help you and my grandchild have a decent, comfortable life. That afternoon, for the first time in months, I felt like my family was being rebuilt from the ground up on respect, honesty, and genuine love, not on control or dependency. Sarah stayed the night. We shared a simple dinner, watched TV together, and talked about the baby. It felt as though all the years we'd lost were being quietly restored. Little by little. Before going to bed, she asked me a question that stopped me in my tracks. Mom, do you have any plans now? After learning everything Dad left behind, do you want to do something different with your life? Such a simple question, yet it went straight to my heart. For decades, I had lived by circumstance. As a wife, as a mother, as the nice neighbor always reacting, never leading, always living for others, rarely for myself. But now, at 64, with financial freedom and the kind of wisdom only time can bring, perhaps, it was time to live for me, to find out what I truly wanted for the rest of my life. You know what, Sarah? I said with a soft smile. Maybe it's time I find out who Cheryl really is. The woman who never had the chance to live as herself. And that was the beginning of the second act of my life. Not at 40, as people often say, but at 64, when I realized it's never too late to start over. 6 months after that kitchen conversation with Sarah, my life had changed more than I ever imagined. It was June, a gentle chill spread through Portland, Oregon. carrying a sense of renewal that perfectly mirrored what was happening inside me. Sarah had given birth at the end of March, a beautiful, healthy baby girl she named Serena. As Sarah said, the name fit perfectly because the baby brought serenity to our lives after all the storms. Serena was born on a Saturday morning in a sunlit room as the first spring rain fell softly outside the window. Becoming a grandmother at 65 was a truly life-changing experience. Holding that baby in my arms, breathing in that sweet newborn scent, seeing in her eyes the continuation of our family's story, I suddenly understood what truly matters most in life. Mark, during the first few months after the trial, tried filing a few meaningless lawsuits, but quickly gave up when he realized there was no chance left. The Portland District Attorney's Office investigation into elder financial exploitation moved swiftly, and he chose to disappear completely. Sarah finalized the divorce smoothly, and since then, he has rarely asked about his daughter. But the true turning point in my life came 3 months after Serena was born. That was when I made the most important decision at 64. To turn part of the fortune Robert left behind into something meaningful to help women who had suffered the same kind of pain I once did. The idea came during a conversation with Judge Henry Moore. He met with me to discuss expanding the St. Mary's Center, and during our talk, he mentioned the alarming number of elder financial abuse cases the Oregon courts handled every year. Mrs. Sherrill, he said, the number of families who exploit their elderly relatives is terrifying. Most victims don't have the money or the knowledge to defend themselves the way you did. That was the moment the idea for Sherrill's Haven, the House of Sherrill, was born. A project I'd never imagined I had the ability to design or lead. I used one of the properties in Washington County to build a shelter for older women who had suffered domestic abuse, not only physical abuse, but emotional manipulation and financial exploitation, the kind of silent cruelty that makes people believe they're no longer capable of living their own lives. The center could accommodate 15 women at a time while they rebuilt their emotional and legal stability. It had private rooms, a shared living area, a small library, and a therapeutic garden. Most importantly, it had a professional team of psychologists, social workers, and attorneys, all united by one goal: to help these women regain confidence in themselves. Sarah, who had a degree in education but had never pursued teaching, became the program's education coordinator. We launched digital literacy classes, financial education workshops, and support groups on elder rights. It was incredibly moving to watch women arrive with downcast eyes, convinced they were a burden then, just a few months later, walk out standing tall, confident, and full of plans for their new lives. The first woman we welcomed was Mrs. Margaret, 71 years old. Her own children had forced her to sell her house so they could split the money. When she refused, they cut her off completely and abandoned her. A nurse at a local medical center noticed signs of depression and neglect and referred her to our center. "Mrs. Sherrill," she said to me on her first day, "I just don't understand how my own children could do that. I raised them with all the love I had." I held her hand and said, "Mrs. Margaret, this isn't your fault. The fault lies in a society that teaches people to see the elderly as obstacles, as burdens, to be removed for the sake of inheritance." We worked with her for 4 months. She slowly regained her confidence, learned how to use a computer to reconnect with old friends, and discovered she was entitled to social benefits she'd never known existed. When she left Sherrill's Haven, she had plans to visit her sister in Idaho, a woman she hadn't spoken to in over 20 years. After 1 year in operation, our center had helped 127 women. Each had her own story. But they all shared one thing. They had been made to believe they no longer had value, that their lives no longer mattered. The project quickly gained public recognition. Social workers from other states came to visit and learn from our model. Oregon newspapers wrote articles about the center. Even universities reached out to Cheryl's Haven to study elder rights and independence in aging. But for me, the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected place. One September morning, nearly a year after the center opened, I received a phone call that brought me to tears. It was from one of the first children ever admitted to the street. Mary's Center, now a 23-year-old woman who had just graduated with a nursing degree. "Mrs. Cheryl," she said, "my name is Caroline. You don't know me, but I wanted to say thank you. I heard that you and your husband helped build the center where I went as a little girl. Now I'm a nurse with a steady job and a good life, and I'd like to help you with your project." Caroline later became a volunteer nurse at our center, providing basic health care to the women staying with us. She even brought along friends, other children who had once grown up at Street Mary's Child Center. A full circle of kindness had completed itself, something Robert could never have imagined the day he quietly made that donation years ago. Now, at 69, every morning I wake up with a reason to live fully, not just to care for my little house in Portland, or to watch over my granddaughter Serena, or to spend time with my daughter Sarah, but because I have meaningful work, helping women who need a second chance at life. Every day at Cheryl's Haven, I witness lives being reborn, women rediscovering freedom, laughter, and faith in themselves. As for Serena, now 4 years old, she often runs through the center's garden, playing with the temporary grandmas, drawing little cards to give them. She's growing up in a world where age isn't a barrier, but a treasure of diversity, where caring for one another is the greatest value of all. Sarah remarried last year this time to a man who truly respects her and loves Serena as his own. They live in their own home, just a few blocks away, close enough to care for each other, but far enough to give everyone space. As for me, I've never thought about remarrying. Not because of pain or fear, but because I've found completeness within myself. I've learned that happiness doesn't have to come from someone else. I have enough strength, wisdom, and compassion to build a life full of meaning with just myself and the people I love. Many people ask me, "Do you ever regret not knowing sooner about the wealth Robert left? Were you ever angry that he kept it secret for so many years?" My answer is always no. I understand why he did it. He wanted to protect me from the pressure and responsibility that money brings, and to make sure everything was secure and stable before passing it on to me. What he couldn't have known was that I had always carried the strength I needed within me, not only to manage what he left behind, but to multiply it for the good of others. I am not just the keeper of my husband's legacy, I am the creator of my own. Because sometimes, those who seem the weakest are, in truth, the strongest. And sometimes, the greatest lesson we can leave behind is that it is never too late to find the strength within ourselves to turn pain into purpose, experience into wisdom, and that wisdom into action that can change the world. This story of Cheryl is fictional, but it was inspired by the real experiences of many people who were dismissed, silenced, or stripped of dignity in their own homes. Names and places have been changed, but the emotions, the pain, the awakening, and the faith are as real as life itself. Sometimes we ask ourselves, when hurt by those we love, should we stay silent to keep the peace or speak up to protect our dignity? There's never an easy answer. But like Cheryl, sometimes speaking up is the only way to truly find yourself again. I believe that God always blesses those who rise, not to seek revenge, but to live fully in truth and compassion. Thank you for watching until the end. Stay a little longer and check out the 2 videos on your screen. One of them just might touch your heart the way this story did today.